Hi everyone, and welcome to our talk, which is about gaming under lockdown. And I'm Dr. Catherine Flick. I'm a reader in computing and social responsibility at De Montfort University in Leicester in the United Kingdom. I have with me my very, very special guests, Dr. Rachel Kowert, who's a research director at Take This, and Dr. Sebastian Deterding, who's a reader or research fellow, or whatever you'd like to call him, at the University of York. And I guess we should probably explain what a reader is just briefly, since there's two of us on a panel, which is very rare indeed. It's basically like an associate professor, but better, because we read a lot, theoretically. Anyway, I just want to start out asking my lovely panelists what they've been playing under lockdown, since this is a gaming under lockdown panel. Rachel, would you like to tell us a little bit about what you've been playing?
Sure. Like millions of others, I've been playing a lot of Animal Crossing, a lot of Animal Crossing. And I recently started playing to the Final Fantasy VII remake, which did come out like months ago, but I have two small children, so it took me a while to get there. Um, but I've been really enjoying both of those games. Both of them old franchises, but newly revamped. So it's been a lot of fun.
Nice. And Sebastian, what have you been playing?
Yeah, I had the fortune to be locked in with my wife, so I actually still had a play pal. So we've been basically kind of grazing off Board Game Geek for new two-player board games that we could play together. And I've been dusting off my old pen and paper role-playing GMing skills, and we've been playing indie one-shots. And one of them now, Lady Blackbird by John Harper, effectively has turned into like a 20-session campaign, and we're still in the middle of it.
That sounds cool. Oh, I'll have to check that one out, definitely. I've also been playing a lot of Animal Crossing, although I haven't been playing it as much recently because I kind of forgot to buy turnips one Sunday, and for some reason that just killed it for me. And then, because Sunday mornings are quite busy in my household, so it actually kind of sucks that you can only buy them on Sunday mornings. So if I miss it, it kind of wrecks it for me for a bit. Anyway, I also have been playing Diablo 3 again. I regularly come back to that game, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But I've also been playing Mini Metro, which is a little mobile game. It's like a puzzle game where you design metro systems. It's been around for a little while, but I just picked that up. And then most recently, I've been playing Baldur's Gate 2 again. Did you know Baldur's Gate 2 is 20 years old now?
Oh
That,
my
yeah, I
gosh.
know. It makes me feel really, really old. But I'm going to talk a little bit about nostalgia and gaming in a bit anyway. So yeah, I'll talk a bit more about that soon. But we'd like to sort of start out with some of the sort of psychology behind gaming under lockdown, because there's been a lot of studies, or there's been a few studies. There's been some research done into what might be the positive or negative effects of lockdown and how gaming might factor into those. So I'd like to hand over to Rachel to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. So games, of course, are always fun. There are always fun activities to do. But now that we're physically distanced and kind of trapped in our homes for a bit, they are a great activity that a lot of people are turning to. They're accessible, they're shared, and they're fun. So we've been playing games, since the beginning of time. You find old cities and there's always dice and cards because play is important for the human lifespan. It's not just critical for children, which I think a lot of people believe, which is supported also by the research that there are more gamers in their 30s than their 20s. And part of the reason is that play in and of itself is associated with reduced stress, reduced depression, and reduced loneliness, three things we all might be feeling more of since the lockdown started. So, games are great at reducing stress for a variety of reasons. There's quite a bit of research looking at how media entertainment in general contributes to mood management and repair. So, what this means is that entertainment media is an effective coping strategy to bring negative moods and emotions back into balance. For instance, research has found bored individuals tend to choose exciting TV programs to watch, stressed individuals tend to choose relaxing TV programs to watch. So games are particularly effective at managing our mood because games are designed to help us meet our basic psychological needs. They help us have a sense of autonomy. We're free to make our own choices. They help us have a sense of competence, that we can achieve things and be successful. And they help us have a sense of relatedness or connecting with others. So these three components, autonomy, competence, and control, these are universal and thought to be essential for our psychological health and well-being. And this idea is referred to as self-determination theory, which you may have heard before in the context of game studies. It is a theory of motivation that came out in the 1970s, but more recently has been expanded to talk about games and how well-designed games can contribute to our well-being. So having these needs met while also having the added element of playfulness is something that's fun, it's pleasant, it makes us feel good, and it helps reduce stress in times of increased stress. Games are also great at socializing, which is kind of another component of lockdown. We've been socially distanced or physically distanced, and socialization is also a natural stress reliever, but also a key component to reducing loneliness, which I know seems like an obvious connection. But loneliness is increased with a wide range of detrimental physical and mental health repercussions, like increased stress, poor decision making, increased risk for substance abuse. Research has actually found that loneliness and social isolation is twice as harmful to a person's physical health than obesity. So it's a big deal, and it's even more so now that we are unable to be close physically to the people that we love. So games are really good at promoting socialization in a way that other things on the internet do not, because of their level of interactivity. And these shared interactive experiences really bolster the positive effects of socialization. So increased self-esteem, decreased feelings of depression, anxiety, isolation, etc. And I also just want to make a quick mention as well, and the socialization aspect, that games do this twofold. So we can play with others, like Sebastian was saying, he's playing with his wife, or I've been playing a lot of Animal Crossing with my 5-year-old. But games also have the element of parasocial relationships, which are the relationships that we have with the in-game characters. So this term was first developed in the 1950s to explain relationships we feel with people on TV. These are one-way relationships. A really good example comes from the research of Emery Daniel and David Westerman, who looked at the relationships we have with Game of Thrones characters. So, spoiler, it's an old show. Come on, you should have seen it. But in Game of Thrones, Jon Snow dies. And in their study, they did a textual analysis of tweets that went out after Jon Snow died. And they compared them against content that people express when someone close in their family dies, the 7 stages of grief, and they matched. So these are not real relationships. Jon Snow is not a real person, but the grief that we felt, the emotions associated with, very real. And we feel these same emotions when we make friends, like in Animal Crossing. So I know that Tom Nook is not my friend, but the emotions of camaraderie and happiness that he is to see me in Animal Crossing, or disappointment when I don't pull my weeds, those emotions are very real. So if you are stuck to be physically isolated, socially isolated at home alone, these kinds of games like Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley, or the games that have a lot of NPCs with storylines that interact with you, can have the benefits of social interaction as well. So taken all together, the stress relief, the socialization, the fun, right? They're games. This, at the end of the day, makes for a perfect activity when you are in lockdown, when you are physically isolated, socially distanced, and looking for something to help relieve the stress of, impending doom that surrounds us with this pandemic.
Just a quick question about that. Do you think that there'd be differences between, say, binge watching a lot of television and playing games? Would it be more of that social aspect of it, or...
I think there would be some differences. I think that binge watching television shows like parasocial relationships, this idea did come out in reference to characters that we see on TV and film. And also it is effective at mood management, but the interactivity, research has found, bolsters these effects. So I think the effects would be of a greater magnitude if you look at the positive impact on reduced stress or depression or loneliness with these interactive games as compared to television or film.
Okay, cool. And so what would you expect as people go through lockdown? Do you expect them to play more games, fewer games, more games with friends, fewer games with friends, and maybe more solo play games? What would you have expected people to do?
My prediction would be more games. I think also more people are playing games who don't normally play games. So my mom has picked up Animal Crossing so she can visit my daughter's island, and she is not one to play games. So I think it's really opened up the idea that games are for everyone and can be used to connect with family and friends in these unique and special ways. I also expect, I think that esports and competitive games are also going to become more popular as the pandemic carries on. I was reading something today about how, television shows for next year can no longer be filmed, and like sports events are now canceled because the teams can't get together. So it'd be interesting to see if games not only continue to rise in terms of what we're doing in our homes, but as a form of like mass entertainment for other people. So something to watch.
Cool. All right. That's, I guess, is that, yep, that's all from you. Then I think
that's all I got.
That's all you got. It's all good. Yeah, okay, that's really interesting stuff, and I think that we can all relate to certainly parts of that. And I mean, certainly for me, I can definitely relate to the social side of it. I mean, I mostly play with my husband, so we really like playing cooperative games, and that's one of the reasons why we picked Diablo 3 up again, was because we wanted to play a game together that didn't require too much brain. So like MMOs and stuff like that often require a lot of brain, and I've got a little baby that's under 1. I mean, he's just turned 1, so my brain isn't working anyway. So we wanted something that was pretty mindless, and like Diablo 3 where you could just bash a button until things die. That's actually quite like satisfying to play. And I mean, yes, it's just basically a grinding game, but it was it had hit all of the buttons for what we wanted. So the cooperative, we had he just sits behind me here in this room, in fact, and so we can yell at each other and tell each other when there's chests or whatever. And it's actually like so for that, for us, it was a perfect game to come back to, even though we haven't played it in probably close to years now. I think last season I played was like 10 or 11, and it's up to like 21 now. So wow. Yeah. So it's been a few years since we played it, but it's been really it's been a lot of fun to pick it back up again. Although this latest season's been pretty crap, so we didn't bother with this latest one. But I mean, I think these sorts of games that are both cooperative, I think the cooperativeness of the games really helps to kind of build those social aspects as well, because I mean, I find certainly in games like PvP type games that it seems to be it's almost more a solo activity of me versus everybody else, right? So I'm not a huge fan of PvP to start with, but I've been watching my husband play a lot of Destiny 2, and he seems to get quite frustrated with it at times. But the things he actually seems to enjoy doing the most are the big raids, where he gets together with groups of people, particularly people where he has some say over who they are, and then they get a big raid done, right? And so it's that cooperative activity that maybe reflects sort of things that we would be doing in real life outside of the lockdown area, right? So we might be working together, even because even at work, I find that I'm not doing these kind of group activities that I would normally do at work. Even things like going and having lunch together or having a meeting or something is kind of, it's distanced now, and that doesn't feel like I'm kind of getting the same kind of things done as I did beforehand. So I think some of these kind of cooperative activities in games can kind of replace the feeling of accomplishment that you kind of get from those activities that you would normally do outside of your room.
That's a wonderful point. I just want to make one small comment, because I was talking to my neighbor the other day. She has a 12-year-old son who's playing a lot of Fortnite, and I was trying to make that exact point. Like, he can't go play basketball. He can't go down the street and play a game of tag or whatever. This is like the only opportunity he has to do that interactive, fun, playful stuff, because you can't do it anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think, it's important to recognize like the utility of that.
Yeah, and I've been talking to a lot of kids recently for another research project that I've been doing, and about lockdown, and they've been talking about how they really want to go back to school. And bet you asked these kids 6 months ago if they'd be looking forward to going to school, and they'd be like, nah. Right. But they mostly want to see their friends, but there's a certain amount of how we build our lives in a structure and rely on these kind of everyday activities that do rely on other people, that is actually a very human thing, I think. It's a value that we really that we're very fond of, is this feeling of accomplishment that comes from creating or working together to accomplish something. So I think that's something that certainly games can fill in there.
I think that really nicely connects to like my role-playing experience as well. So it felt like this is exactly the right thing. It's not too demanding on you, right? Pen and paper role-playing has a lot of downtime and chit-chat, and in that case, it's actually just kind of the pretext for you to hang out with other people that gives you that downtime so you can actually hang with them together. And meanwhile, it's overall like even if it is GM versus players, in our case, it's not. It's very story driven, but even if ultimately you're trying to create a fun evening that you have together, which is again this kind of joint cooperative activity instead of pitting one person against another person.
Yeah, and definitely. I mean, I've been playing a lot of D&D as well. In fact, I've just last night we just played. I think it was about the third or fourth session. It must have been about the fourth session. I've redone one of the original dungeon crawl games. I've like basically just gotten the maps and I put them into Roll20, and then I stuck a bunch of monsters on, right? And and so I kind of recreated them in 5th edition, right? And it's been so much fun because I haven't done a traditional just dungeon crawler game in a really long time, and I think I've managed to kill my paladin almost 4 times now, which I'm really proud of. Although we've got a cleric, so he doesn't stay dead, sadly. But you know, you have a good go, right? But even in that, it's part of co-creating an experience. You know, if I just presented a game and they just went blip blip blip, you know, roll the dice and you're done, it would be pretty boring. But they add, you know, there's so much more that is added to a tabletop role play experience than just kind of the rolling the dice and moving characters, you know, moving things around. But I have to say, Roll20's been brilliant for gaming with my regular game group, because normally we would have dinner together, and normally like it would be actually games was kind of the excuse to have dinner together once a week, like Sebastian was saying. And but you know, we still play, so but we play online. But it's been actually, Roll20 has been really, really good for that, because it does make it very easy, certainly to set a game up as well. If you kind of know what you're up to, it's actually really easy to set something up. And I've really appreciated that tool is available, because otherwise it would be quite difficult. And I think you'd have to kind of go back to some of the more sort of much more story-driven games, like even 5th edition, you can do a lot more story driven than say 3.5 or something like that. But you know, some of the ones that you sort of hear like the podcasts of, or you know, streams of, and I know, Rachel, you're involved in a D&D streaming thing, so those tend to be a lot more story driven, so you can get the interactions between characters than a lot of the kind of more classic dungeon crawly roll lots of dice type games. So yeah, so I think that Roll20's made that a lot easier for kind of bridging that gap a little bit, and allowing gaming nights like mine to continue despite lockdown, right? So that's been really nice for me. Sebastian, have you used Roll20 at all, or?
I've trialed and cycled through, and again, because we're so rules light, we're so rules minimal, it's really shared world and story creation that so we end up a whole evening where somebody rolls a die once, and for that it's basically a dice bot in Slack or a dice bot in Zoom is just fine.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, so I mean, mine's a classic dungeon crawler, so it is going to be a more dice heavy game. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I think also sort of this, like these sorts of games really hook into that sense of nostalgia. I think you mentioned that, Rachel, in your very, very beginning when you said what you were playing, right? You said you were playing Final Fantasy VII, which obviously it's the remake, but it must hook into that nostalgia feeling of calm and like the comforting nature of nostalgia, because I mean, we're all very stressed out, we're anxious, you know, all those emotions and anxieties that we have about lockdown. You know, going out and going shopping is a huge ordeal now, you know, because you've got to like deal with a whole bunch of jerks, and you've got to put your mask on, you've got to like navigate lots of signage and lots of things, and it becomes very, very stressful. And so just everyday activities that we kind of took for granted before are now like adding to our anxieties. So being able to kind of come back and, you know, play an old game that we're familiar with, one that we've perhaps played before, maybe we didn't finish it last times because we were much younger or didn't, you know, less experience with game playing. Certainly, so this is why I've been replaying Baldur's Gate 2, right? Because I never finished it. I realized, like, it's been 20 years and I still haven't finished Baldur's Gate 2, but I must have started it a million times. I feel like it. So my aim for this, this period is to actually finish Baldur's Gate 2. I mean, I know what happens and everything, because like I must have, like I know all the spoilers and everything, but I just never got around to finishing. But I want to be able to do that, and I think that, and it's quite a calming thing for me too, because it's a familiar environment. Like I'm much better at D&D now than when I first, so I know how D&D works, and that actually kind of helps make it more familiar. And so I can cheese things a little bit if I have to, which is helpful. And then, but then also just the setting is familiar. But the other, like playing Diablo 3 is also a comforting, familiar, nostalgic environment. I mean, I was playing the original Diablo like a really, really long time ago. And so I've come through playing those games. So they're actually a very nice environment for me to go back to. So it's not just the fact that, yes, they're cooperative games, or they're a certain type of game that means that I can play it by myself, or means that I can kind of escape. It's an escapist type thing. So Baldur's Gate, I would say, is more an escapist because it's a fantasy role play game. It's more of an escapist thing than say Diablo 3. But yeah, they both have that nostalgia twang as well. And even Animal Crossing, you said, I played the original, well, was it the original one on GameCube? But certainly...
It was.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, that was my sister and we played it, and we had a fantastic time playing Animal Crossing. And I never got around to picking up New Leaf, because I was really, at the time, I didn't have time for it, and I was really scared. I didn't want my villagers to leave because I hadn't pulled the weeds for a while or whatever, and because I hate that. And so it was really nice to kind of come back into Animal Crossing again as well. Like, it's just not stressful. You've got a nice low stress multiplayer, so you're not expected to do anything particularly with multiplayer. You can just kind of, poke a friend on Twitter or something and open up your space, and people come in and run around and, I don't know, do stuff, and it's just nice kind of low stress, apart from the turnips. That's my source of stress now. But now you've got the app, you can put all your turnip prices in, right? And you don't even have to talk to other people to find out what their turnip prices are. You can just like hide in the shame of only having made 2 bells per turnip this time. But but I have to say though, I stopped playing Pokemon Go. So I've been quite an avid player of Pokemon Go, and I've done a lot of research on Pokemon Go. One of the talks I did at previous PAX was on Pokemon Go. I've got a lot invested in Pokemon Go, but I've actually stopped. And I think that Niantic, when they were suddenly struggling with what do we do, because all of a sudden our game that requires people to go out and walk around, people are not allowed by law to do that in many places, right? And so what do we do? So they really did, they piled on a whole load of work to actually make it so you could play it in a small radius around your home, or while you were doing other kind of things like going shopping or something like that, and not requiring you to kind of go out every day and do the thing every day necessarily. And so that was really nice that they did that. But I have to say, like, what really frustrated me was seeing like new Pokemon pop up on my radar and not being able to go there and catch them. And so I had to stop playing, because that was stressing me out too much. And also had, trying to deal with navigating a pushchair with a baby in it, and playing Pokemon Go is actually really hard. So I had to kind of change up how I did stuff, and it meant that I stopped playing. And I think that's mostly, I just got frustrated at the fact that I couldn't go to the place to catch the Pokemon anymore. But I really think though they did a really good job of actually making it playable. So they brought in a battle league where you didn't have to actually be physically close to somebody to battle them. They brought in special, like, longer lasting incense, which attracts Pokemon to you. And they brought in free or very, very cheap, like 1 coin or whatever, boxes that would give you lots of Pokeballs, because people were running out of Pokeballs and things to actually catch the Pokemon. So they really responded very, very well, I think, to the community, who were giving them some good ideas, and then they actually implemented quite a few of them, which I think was really good. And there's now remote.
And I think it also shows that you're a pretty conscientious Pokemon player. So oddly enough, in Finland, there have been 2 empirical studies about Pokemon players and COVID. And basically what they found is if you trust the government and the pandemic is bad in your area, then you say you're less likely to go out. While if you have a massive fear of missing out, you say, I'm missing out all the new Pokemon, then you're less likely to actually stay in. And then basically the second study found that although people were reporting that when they actually measured, now this was in early March, so this was before all of the changes have been implemented, but when they looked at before and after kind of lockdown in Finland right away, that people's behavior actually didn't change that much in terms of raiding together in Pokemon just before and just after. But again, that might be because in Finland in March things weren't that bad either way, and the game itself hadn't changed that much yet.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, I mean, because now you can do the remote raids, so you don't even need to go to the raiding spot to actually do the raids with people, which is kind of cool. But I mean, they've also added some kind of, you can pay to do multiple ones of these. I haven't kept up with all of the specifics, but I mean, they're still making bank off it. Let's just say they found ways to get money off people, even though they're not going out and walking eggs and things anymore. But yeah, so I think and then it goes the other way too, right? So in Melbourne, in Australia, which has just been locked down again, there was a fellow who was fined recently for walking around playing Pokemon Go because he was walking around during lockdown, and you weren't supposed to be doing that except for essential activities, right? So so he actually got fined. So, and there's a few stories of people who have gotten into trouble for playing Pokemon Go under lockdown because of the curfews, well, not really curfews, but, like space restrictions and things like that. So I think, I mean, but then on the other hand, Niantic didn't really do a huge amount for Ingress, and I suspect that's probably because, and the Ingress players who are listening will probably agree that they've basically, in some ways, they're like, yep, okay, Pokemon Go, we've got the Wizard, we've got Harry Potter, we've got Pokemon Go, we're sorted now, we don't need you anymore, which is a bit of a shame, really, considering that's kind of where it came from. So, good points, bad points, Niantic. I'll give you about a B for COVID response there. But I think, in terms of how I've changed my gaming, I think the main thing is that my gaming has changed. I mean, it's changed for multiple reasons. I have a baby now, which means my attention span is shorter. I need to be able to pause games. I can't stay up late playing games all night with my friends, so MMOs and things like that are kind of out. I have to my brain doesn't work after about 8 o'clock, so I need mindless stuff and things like that. So that's changed how I've played, but also I've really found myself going back to these nostalgic, comforting games to make me feel a lot better about myself. So that's been my gaming. Sebastian, do you want to tell us a whole bunch of, I know that you've been working on kind of collating a bunch of different studies about gaming in lockdown. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've found?
Sure. So we've been basically doing the kind of thing that as a scientist you're supposed to do, which is basically, right, we have all of these personal experiences and we have all of these theories and ideas. Let's see what the data tells us. It turns out that mostly in terms of the research out there, in games research as well as in other fields, COVID is a bit of a kind of a mad gold rush to get the first publication on the topic out so that you get your dings, which is your citations on that. So basically you see tons of editorials and letters to an editor saying, we have this theory and it might apply to COVID. Now please give us a citation. And there's very little empirical data that's been rigorously collected and that's already been done. So if you want to find out more on COVID-19-games.org is basically where we have this ongoing repository of all the kind of studies that we found out there that already exist. So because of that, and there's probably 24 other people out there who are doing this right now, have done a large-scale online survey where we were actually interested in, okay, how did the lockdown, how did the pandemic affect how people play, why they play, how does it affect their mood? Got a decently large sample of about 250 people. And as Rachel said at the beginning, right, so we have kind of two major ideas or theories in games research about how games might impact mood: self-determination theory and mood management. Self-determination theory basically says we have these basic needs for competence and relatedness and autonomy. And so you would assume, okay, if that goes down in your life, right, you're not autonomous because the government tells you you can't do X. You don't get relatedness satisfaction because you're disconnected from your friends, and competence, you just feel powerless in the face of everything. So all of that in your everyday life goes down. So therefore you feel sad. So you should pick up games which give you all of that. So you should pick more games which give you all of these experiences that real life doesn't give you. And mood management theory says similarly, right? So if your mood is bad, you choose games or you choose media that will improve your mood. You will choose things that absorb you and distract you so you don't ruminate and think about the bad things going on around you. You will pick things that are happy and cheerful, and you will pick things that sort of calibrate your arousal level. So if you're low and depressed, you will pick something that kind of energizes you. And if you're anxious and kind of super excited, you're going to pick something calming that basically takes you down. So we went out there with a survey to 250 players all across the world, actually with kind of self-reports, measured exactly these kinds of ideas. And then we also collected some qualitative data on top of that. So we asked people about, okay, subjectively from your perspective, just tell us in your own words, how did this change your gaming? How did this affect your mood? And well, it's science, so the answer is it's complicated. Basically, our quantitative data told us all of the theories did not pan out. Actually, in self-determination theory, we found the opposite of what we expected is the case. People who are already feeling a lot of need satisfaction in real life reported also having more need satisfaction in games. So it's basically, if you're happy and cheerful and joyful, then everywhere in your life you're going to experience more joy, experience more need satisfaction. If you're low, then everywhere in your life, in gaming or outside, you're going to experience the same. And for mood management, we found, no, all of the features that we listed that supposedly like you would choose in order to pick certain media. So it absorbs and distracts you, it's cheerful, it modulates kind of how anxious or how tired you feel. None of that has any correlation whatsoever with how you're feeling right now in real life. So data 1, theory 0, back to the drawing board. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of possible explanations for that. I don't know, Rachel, would you have some explanations for any of the above?
Well, I mean, maybe it's difficult too with self-report measures saying like, how do you feel right now? Sometimes it's hard for people to gauge appropriately how they feel or what role media is playing in helping manage their moods. I mean, my first instinct is always self-report, and maybe the measures aren't nuanced enough. But I think that, didn't you say that there was different pictures in the qualitative data?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so in the quantitative, we had the same kind of thing where we say, well, it might be that the data is a fluke, right? You always have that chance with statistical data. It might be that people are just rubbish at remembering. So we asked them kind of, how was your mood in general in the last week? What kind of games did you pick to play in the last week? That people are just very bad at kind of remembering and accurately reporting these kind of things on these kind of Likert scale bubbles. And so that's one of the reasons why we see these effects, or the theories might be wrong, right? So it's complicated. But yeah, in the qualitative data, so a lot of the things that you've already mentioned actually came out. So the first thing that people reported is they play more. They play a lot more games. And one of the main reasons for that is simply, right, you've been furloughed or you've been blocked out of your everyday activity, so you just have more time, very pragmatically, and you're bored. And the boredom is sort of an opening for then stress and anxiety and negative thoughts. And so therefore you kind of fill the gap or fill the void, as some of our participants actually call that, with gaming, because that's the thing that you have available in order to fill up your empty time. So people just play more. And the second one is they definitely play more with other people. So socializing, using games in order to socialize and connect with others was very, very high in the repeated ways in which people reported playing and why they played it. So one really lovely quote or example that sort of summarized all of that very well is basically this family father saying, my 7-year-old enjoys it meaning board gaming, and as my wife and I have spent most of the day working from home, we use board games to spend time with him at the end of the day. We bought several new board games, spending far more time playing them before lockdowns. So a lot of what people report actually kind of has less to do with psychological states than just with pragmatics. Like, I now have less access to my previous couch co-op friends, so I can't play with them anymore. And so therefore I now play games online. Or I'm locked in with these people, so now I'm playing with the people that I happen to be locked in with. Or I have access to these games, so therefore I'm just going to play these games. So a lot of the changes have to do a lot with pragmatics and less kind of the psychology of gaming. And then I think in terms of nostalgia, so that was another thing that came up. People play a lot of different games. So across 40 interviews that we analyzed, we have 130 different games that people reported playing. And it's really everything. It's from Sudoku to Dark Souls, with a good smattering of Animal Crossing in there, obviously, and lots of D&D, lots of different board games, etc. But one of the main reasons why people reported picking certain games, other than that's what was available, is because that's familiar, that's comfortable. So they said, I knew the game before, I enjoyed playing the game before, and now they have a new release, so I'm returning to it. So there are a lot of market researchers talking about people's eating habits, and they say we expect a lot of comfort food to come back into fashion during the pandemic, because it's this comforting, consoling return to childhood. And it seems to be that with gaming appetite and the qualitative data, we definitely see the same thing, that
Me.
yeah, exactly. People I return to role playing, which my heydays were in my 20s.
There we go.
So yeah, it's the very same thing.
Yeah.
Which are not long ago at all. No, not at all. So yeah, so we see a lot of this kind of nostalgic gaming definitely showing up. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that your qualitative data does kind of support, lend more support anyway to the theoretical connections between mood management and SDT, because I think it really points to the idea that research is complicated and quantitative and qualitative always paint a better picture. Because if you just had the data, you would say, oh, that's weird. We have all these theories with, this, 30-year history of looking at it that seems to be supported. And now all of a sudden, when it comes to COVID, they're not. Whereas actually, it looks like there's some kind of disconnect because it is being supported in what they report. They're playing more with others.
Yeah, this is why statistics is actually really hard as well.
Yeah. And it may just well have to do with how statistics measure these things. So one of the, for instance, if you look into self-determination theory, one of the beefs there is that a lot of the questions that you're asking there, when it comes to feelings of connection, of relatedness, they're not necessarily well designed to capture something like parasocial relationships. Like most of the surveys out there don't really have questions that fit that. So a student of mine did a similar study where we then asked people how they understood the questionnaire items, and they say, well, this one here about meaningful relations is very hard to understand. Like, so is it fine that I name Seamus as the non-player character? Because then, yes, absolutely, as the player character, absolutely. If not, then I would answer this completely differently. So yeah, so for relatedness, we found that definitely social connection matters for people a lot, and it's one of the reasons they kind of gravitate towards gaming, more towards gaming in general than particular games. And the same for kind of the absorption aspect of mood management theory. So that came out very, very clearly over and over again in the qualitative data, where people say, I'm stressed, the situation is dismal, or I'm depressed and I'm ruminating, I'm just in these circular thoughts. And gaming is just a way to occupy my mind, as they say, and then literally just shut all of these thoughts off. So it might be even mindless, but as long as I'm playing, my brain is not occupied with the other things that worry me. And that's kind of the major thing. Not even escaping towards something better, but just the sheer fact that your brain is occupied with some kind of activity that is not unpleasant or anxiety inducing.
I think this is also sorry, you go.
I was just going to say preoccupied with clouds broodiness instead of,
Yeah. Well, I was gonna link this back into sort of some of the more traditional studies of gaming as well, where they talk about this as I mean, they seem to link this kind of activity with almost like an addiction, right? There's these addictive qualities of games, and it makes me, it makes me really think that actually COVID's a really interesting space to actually look at what actually is this space that's being created that people feel they need to fill it with games, right? And it may not be that it's an addiction to games, but it's an addiction, not an addiction. It's a need to fill space so that you don't have those bad thoughts or those circular thoughts and things like that. And so I know, Rachel, you're particularly skeptical of traditional.
Don't make me get on my soapbox. I
think we've got a few minutes, so you could briefly get on your soapbox. But I mean, one of the things I certainly saw going into COVID were stories about how COVID could cause people to become more addicted to games, or could cause people to I think that was mostly it, was more addicted, and then of course from there they generally go to becoming more violent, right? Because that's how these traditional thought trajectories go, right? These are like Daily Mail articles, so they're not high concept, but there's still, despite being debunked that there are these connections, there's still this desire somewhere for people to link that link games with negative practices, right? And I think what we're seeing very much here is that actually the games are being linked much more to positive practice. And I mean, even if it is being used as a distraction technique for, let's say, some other sort of some mental illness or mental or anxiety or something like that, it's being used in a positive way there, right? Can you sort of sort these thoughts out for me a little bit, Rachel?
Well, I will say, just this week I published an article on Medium called "Is COVID-19 is video game addiction still a thing in the era of COVID-19?" Because we know that the World Health Organization, who was largely pushing for this conceptualization of video game addiction when COVID-19 lockdown started, came out with a statement saying games are a great way to socially connect during COVID-19. And in the article, I talk about, the scholar's open letter about why we have concerns about this conceptualization, yada, yada, yada. But I want to just talk briefly about something you mentioned at the end. And I think that Sebastian and I share similar thoughts on this. Whereas having a distraction, we're about to find out, having a distraction or escapism is not inherently bad. We escape into a good book. We escape into a Netflix series. We binge watch a Netflix series. And even the word binge is not a particularly positively slanted one. But people don't see that as the same negative as like, oh my goodness, Rachel stayed up all night and overslept because she was playing Final Fantasy VII. Right? That's a problem. But, Rachel's husband stayed up all night watching The Witcher. Not a problem. So it's like, where's this disconnect? Is it the moral panic? Is it because of that? I don't know. What are your thoughts, Sebastian?
So the interesting thing is that it's not as if this wasn't in players' minds. So in our own player statements, we had a lot of players saying that, oh, I have all of this time and now playing it with video games. And again, as we mentioned, a lot of saying, now I have the social alibi, right? There's nothing else to do, so I might as well play video games. And players themselves report thinking about this, oh, might this lead into an addiction or might this not lead into an addiction? But they're not reporting that it does for them. So I'd say that's sort of my first baseline. If so, somebody in our data would come forward and then say, no, actually, and I observe with myself something that I find personally troublesome, I think that would be an indication. So to some extent, that's kind of a fear that is coming kind of from the outward onto the players rather than is something that is experienced, at least in our data, by a lot of people playing video games. I think the sort of the qualification that I would make is to say, in lots of situations, lots of things become very, very effective coping mechanisms. And you could make an argument to say, okay, where the coping mechanism itself becomes problematic or destructive or exacerbates the problem that you're dealing with, then you're potentially in a loop that might cause you issues. So if we look into something like gambling, where you say, okay, gambling got you into debt, you don't like to think about your debt. The thing to distract you from the fact that you're into debt is to do more gambling. That would be the kind of loop that you say, okay, that is an issue. But then again, if we look into the data, if we look at the very problematic ways in which addictions or behavioral addictions are measured, then I don't see good evidence for any of that happening with the overwhelming majority of video game players. Like a colleague of ours did this nice thought experiment recently as an actual experimental study. If we use current measures of addiction as they're used for video games, and we just call it friendship addiction, lo and behold, a large percentage of the population is addicted to having friendships, which tells us nothing about how bad friendships are. It tells us something about how problematic these kind of, again, self-report measures are for capturing or for thinking about a phenomenon like this.
I'm terribly addicted to friendship. I'm sorry. I have a confession to make. Yeah. No, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it, right? And I think I suspect that's why some people then go on to think about the content, right, of what then people are playing. But and I mean, that's always going to be quite a controversial. That's definitely another whole nother talk, right? But I mean, I think it's really interesting that we do this sort of social alibi thing is actually really kind of. I mean, in many ways, the last time I was able to sit down and play games for a really long time was when I was in university, right? And I think, so for a lot of people who aren't at college, university, or school or whatever, where you get large periods of time where you can just sit and kind of spend it how you like. I mean, I'm on holiday today, right? And my child is in childcare, so I have the whole day. And, if I wasn't setting up for this talk and I wasn't doing a whole bunch of other activities, I would probably be sitting down and playing a video game for a period of time, which might even be the longest period of time I've been able to sit down and play a video game in several years, right? And I would enjoy that. And, I might feel a little guilty afterwards because I hadn't got the washing done, or I hadn't finished off a bunch of little DIY chores that I've been trying to get done or whatever. But I will have, had fun, I would have enjoyed playing the game while I wasn't playing it, and it's an accomplishment within itself. And one of my goals is to finish Baldur's Gate 2 by sometime, before we all get vaccinated and COVID's, which to be fair is a nice long deadline for me, I suspect, which is good. But it having that kind of ability to give myself that space, especially as a new mother, is actually really impressive, right? I mean, I don't get that. I don't often get that opportunity. I'm expected to go out and do mum things, or I'm expected to go, to work, or there's a whole bunch of things that I'm expected to do, but because I'm in lockdown, I can sit and play video games, and it's great. And I think there's probably a lot of people who are in that situation and who aren't, who possibly have a lot fewer things that they've got on their plate than I do, but also probably a bunch of people who've got a whole load more things on their plate than I do. And being able to actually kind of go back to that time when I was able to play video games for a long time, or, Sebastian, you playing your tabletop games, right? You're sort of going back to your 20s, which, as you say, wasn't that long ago. And but it's a nice way to kind of reconnect with a younger self as well, and perhaps a more carefree self in some ways that didn't have as much responsibility, and didn't have to look after a household, or do all these things that us slightly older adults now have to do, right? So I think that's nice.
Maybe. Yes, slightly older adults. Yeah.
Slightly, just slightly.
I think the weird thing about that is, right, even though you have that free time, you still feel guilty about it, right? I think that's so. Oddly enough, we've done another study some time ago about alibis for adult play. So what kind of excuses do adults come up with in order to legitimize, I'm a responsible adult and I still play games? Why is that? And it seems to be that, right, lots of role models, male and female role models, and to some extent a kind of Protestant work ethic that if you're not productively laboring as an adult all the time, you're doing something wrong. Which is just one particular kind of ethics that are floating around. So what's principally wrong with saying I enjoy life, and there's a part of life, there's a part of time where I did away with all of my responsibilities. There are none. I have a free space. And so now enjoying life for its own sake should presumably be what it's all about to begin with. That's what work should enable us to be able to do, rather than saying, no, do away with all of that free time and do away with all of that enjoyment and rather work more. Right?
It's the live to work, work to live thing, right? Classic,
Yeah.
your dichotomy, right? Yeah, that speaks very. That also speaks in I've been told as a mother of a small child, that his job is to play, right? And that's his job is to play. And I'm like, that's not like, he just plays, and that's how he just experiences the world, right? And the whole idea of casting this as a job is just setting him up for this, grind of this treadmill of guilt, particularly anxiety, feeling like he's not good enough for whatever. And I mean, this is kind of what I think in many ways work kind of does to us. So it's nice to have this space for a bit. And so, yeah, I guess the message is, if you're feeling what we're just talking about, don't feel bad. Don't feel like you need to justify sitting down playing video games for a few hours, even if you've got the laundry piling up or the dishes need to get done, or you've got, I guess you should probably feed your children. That's probably a good thing to do, isn't it?
Do that one. Do
that one.
And then you can play.
Yeah, then you can play.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, but don't feel bad about grabbing a few hours, even a few minutes, a few minutes on a mobile game, an hour or so on another game that you enjoy, and just let you have some time for yourself as well. Because, a lot of, particularly women under lockdown have actually had to do a whole lot of more work, and especially if there are children in the family, and often they're working and doing childcare and doing all the usual household chores, and so actually, I mean, I've certainly felt this a little bit myself, right? And it's actually so that it's very easy to start feeling guilty that you haven't done, because you've got all these things that are in your head that you feel like you need to have gotten done. It's very easy to sort of start feeling guilty that you haven't done it. So actually, yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I haven't played more video games, is actually a lot of that kind of feeling of guilt. But now that we're starting to open up a little bit, and I can send my child back to childcare, I'm now able to kind of free up some space to actually get those other chores done. I can now spend some time doing that, which is really nice, I think. This has sort of turned into a little bit of a new mum talk as well, sorry. But yeah, I mean, I think normalizing play for adults is actually really important, especially responsible adults. Yep. And play with your kids as well, right? I mean, if there's sorts of people who get worried about Fortnite or whatever, or Fall Guys, or people being horrible on games for their kids or whatever, a lot of those people don't actually sit down and play them with their children, and they don't actually have the time or the or they don't spend the time to actually get to know the game, to get to know how it's played, to actually supervise their children playing it, and experience that game with their kids. And I think if more people did that, they'd probably find that games aren't actually as bad as all that, maybe.
And lockdown is a great time to do that.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
Time now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no excuse.
That was some of the really fun. There was some of the really fun stories in the data where lots of people say, I'm now locked in with my girlfriend and I'm going to show her all my favorite video games from my childhood, and we're just going to play them from beginning to end.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I mean, the sort of things that I hear families, when they come to PAX and visit the booth that I have in the Diversity Lounge at PAX East occasionally. Well, I haven't had it this year, but probably not next year either, but in future. But I usually get lots of families coming by, and one of the big things that they say to me all the time is how much they all enjoy playing together. And it may just be, usually it's something like Minecraft, or it might be something like Fortnite, and even, And it's so weird to say this, even mum gets involved with Fortnite, but I'm a mum now, right? And I'm going to be getting involved in Fortnite. Why is that such a weird thing, right? And parents I'm almost 40, but I grew up playing video games, right? So I'm not going to stop just because I'm old. I'm just going to start playing them with different people, i.e. my kids. I can't wait till he's old enough that I can play games with him now. So I guess, Rachel, you've got older children that you can play with, right?
My daughter is 5, almost 6, and Minecraft and Animal Crossing are very big in this house. Although it's a little frustrating because she'll just take down all my Animal Crossing decorations and put up her own. So prepare for that. When you play with your kids, it's slightly different. It's slightly different, but it's super fun.
But at least you can share you can share some of your love for those older franchises too, though, right? So,
Definitely. Yeah.
Is there anything, like, was there anything more about families in your data? Like, did you get anything about any sense of families playing, Sebastian? Ooh,
I think the main findings about families playing is again, connecting remotely. So trying to find ways that were technically feasible for everybody to play remotely. So right, to the point to say, okay, we have 2 copies of, I don't know, Mysterium or a board game, and then we set it up here and somebody else sets it up there and you try to parallelize it. So to me, the most fascinating aspect of that was literally the logistical lengths to which people got in order to be able to stage some kind of shared playing experience across kind of distance households. And yeah, that was typically within families and usually also across generations. So, right. So
yeah, that's so
grandpa
cool.
and grandma are far away and locked away and we can't do anything with them, but we'll find a way to make checkers work or something like that.
That's so cool. I love that people are doing that, especially with the physical games as well. Actually, that is really cool. All right, so I think we're going to have to wrap it up now. I guess maybe if we all just go through and sort of have a sentence takeaway type message type thing, and pluggable if you have something that you're doing. Let everybody know what it is, where they can reach you, that sort of thing. So I'll start with Rachel.
So my takeaway would be play is important for adults too. And I think don't feel guilty about taking time for yourself to play. I think that's a good one to take away. That's my takeaway. I'll just share that with the rest of you as well. In terms of pluggable, you can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Kowert. I also am a science streamer and content creator called Psychgeist, and you can find me on YouTube and live on Saturdays on Twitch if you want to learn more about the science of games.
Cool. And Sebastian?
Okay, with the main takeaway taken, I think mine is that boredom really matters. I think in a lot of research, we haven't really looked too deeply into boredom, but particularly during COVID, what our data shows us that boredom is something negative, something adults apparently experience very frequently, and in this situation even more, and dealing with boredom is something that's psychologically actually important, that games are really good at doing. If you want to learn more about me, you can follow me at Dink's tweets, go to codingcontact.cc, which is my website, or read the most recent book that I've put out with 50 other academics, where we try to write up everything anybody ever said in research about role-playing games. So it's just called Role-Playing Game Studies, and it's out with Routledge.
Brilliant. And I'm you can find me on Twitter at it's just at Catherine Flick. You can visit my podcast, which I do with a friend of mine, Tia, which is about ethics and video games at notjustagame.eu. And that's pretty much all I've been doing recently. I've had a baby, so that was a little bit exciting and took up a bit of time. But I'm currently working on some papers to do with some of the stuff that I've been collecting at PAX in the Diversity Lounge. So I'm actually working on a thing about gender and diversity based on some of the conversations I've had with people at PAX East, which is going to be really fun. So look out for that soon. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Hope you've all enjoyed listening to this particular panel, and stick around for whatever's up next, because I'm sure it's going to be just as good as ours as well. All right. Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.